Good morning, everyone. Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? This section of the Committee of Supply will now consider the estimates of the Department of Finance. Does the Honourable Minister have an opening statement? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know what, I'm just going to yield to the questions right off the bat to expedite the process so we can get as much information as possible out.
We thank the Minister. Does the critic from the official opposition have an opening statement? The member for Fort Garry.
No, we do not. We just wish to proceed to questioning.
We thank the member. Seeing as nobody here from the opposition. Under Manitoba practice, debate of the minister's salary is the last item considered for a department in the Committee of Supply. Accordingly, we shall now defer consideration of line item 7.1A contained in Resolution 7.1. At this time, we invite, and we ask that the minister introduce the staff in attendance. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
We've got Richard Groen, our Deputy Minister, supported by Sylvester, I see your last name, Camboni, and Ryan, I see your last name, Clausen. It's a real tough one, Clausen. So we're supported by our administrative officials in the Department of Finance and Treasury Board.
Does the committee wish to proceed through the estimates of this department chronologically or have a global discussion? The member for Fort Garry.
We're seeking a global discussion.
Thank you. It is agreed then the questioning for this department will proceed in a global manner with all resolutions to be passed once questioning has concluded. The floor is now open for questions. The member for Fort Garry.
Thank you. Just wanted to let the minister know that we recently received a FIPA request back from Municipal Relations that showed some analysis on the impact of education property tax on pipelines, railways, multinational corporations and their owners. And it showed that the pipelines and railways would save $29 million annually with the complete elimination of the education property tax. And the commercial number was blacked out. I'm wondering if the minister could explain if any analysis has been done on the education tax rebates for commercial property.
Before I recognize the minister, I would like to inform the committee that when the speaker has 1 minute left remaining, I will wave this sign up to let you, just give you some warning that you have a minute left. And also, because we're doing this virtually, I want to make sure that the minister gives a proper hand signal to make sure that I don't recognize him before he is ready. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To answer the question, first of all, there's 658,000 property owners that got some sort of benefit. And the average property owner in the city of Winnipeg, I think, was around close to just close to $500, but it really depends how big your property was. But the numbers were 84 million for farmland and commercial.
The member for Fort Garry.
So I'm wondering if the minister then can clarify how much he anticipates commercial properties will receive in rebates with the elimination.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yes, there's 50,000 commercial property owners and other properties we categorize. Got a 10% rebate, as people may or may not recall. It's a 25% rebate for all residential properties. So there's in the tunes of 658,000 Manitobans got a property tax break, which is really important. And again, 50,000 property owners got a 10% rebate. Commercial properties got a 10% rebate, and that's in the tunes of $40 million.
The member for Fort Garry.
Has there been any analysis done for secondary properties?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yeah, just to reiterate, so there's 658,000 Manitobans that own property in really in the province. Got a much needed education property tax cut. Now, for the most part, it really depends on how big your property was and the assessed value and all that sorts. But suffice it to say, over 658,000 Manitobans got that support. If you're talking about secondary properties, I believe about 110,000 secondary properties got a rebate because they own property in the province of Manitoba.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister can tell us how much they anticipate the secondary properties will receive in rebates with the elimination.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so the secondary properties, now you got to remember with the secondary properties, what happens is you can't get a credit. So part of this whole process, there's education property tax reduction. So the government is committed to a 50% reduction over the next 2 years, 25% of course this budgetary year, 25% next year. Our government is committed to phasing it out over a 10-year period. So we haven't talked about the future years. And just to nuance the point, if you're a secondary property owner, so let's say you own a cottage, or you own maybe a secondary property that you make some income off of, you don't get the credit, right? So the plan again is to reduce the education property tax, but also phase out the credit. Now, a part of that, the credit, we've done a couple of things to address that. Number one, we've frozen property taxes for 2 years, or frozen rent control for 2 years. We put a 0%, and we also put about $31 million more in the rent assist program, so people are able to get more supports. But to answer your question specifically, it's $40 million this year. That's 25%. So I'll get you to times that by 4 is the total amount.
The member for Fort Garry.
Yeah, we've recently received an internal document that explained that residential and farm property owners will receive an average rebate of $358. Apartment owners and landlords will receive an average rebate of $1,700. And as you're fully aware, the renters are obviously losing their rebate. So I'm wondering if the minister can justify how these tax rebates are fair to the average Manitoban.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So thank you for the question. And so we truly believe that number one, people that are paying education property tax are paying too much, and that's why we committed to phasing it out over a 10-year period. We did obviously the first 25% this year, 25% next year. We wish that all parties in the legislature would have supported that because we think people are paying too much, but that wasn't the case. So I'll let you, talk to your constituents why you didn't support that. But I would say on the back end of the equation, number one, you have 650,000 people that own property are getting benefits, like a good amount of money too back. And the rent portions of things, for the renters, we wanted to support the renters as well. So what we did is we put a cap on essentially a rent control, essentially for 2 years. That's a part of it. And so what we did for there, and so benefits, so for instance, a renter would get the benefit of the 0% rent control for 2 years. And then obviously we also built into the regs if people are applying for the above rent guidelines, and they would have to take in consideration what the landlord got back in terms of the rental there. So we did some analysis, and so just breaking it down maybe so you can understand maybe a little bit better. I took a constituency, a building actually in your constituency, maybe pronouncing it wrong, Adamar Manor, which is at 110 Adamar. I could be saying the name wrong. But essentially under our plan, as opposed to your plan, which is the status quo, someone who's renting would actually be $68 better under our plan. So we think that not just renters, which is important, but the 650,000 Manitobans that own property in the province of Manitoba are going to see benefits. So there's benefits on both sides. What we also did is we did, as I mentioned, not just the rent control, but we also put another $31 million in the rent assist program. So more people are supported. In fact, since come to office, there's been almost 3,000 more people supported in the rent assist program. So that's a large amount of people. Probably the venue, go to maybe a big night at the convention center, right? That amount of people are more supported under the rent assist program. And that's one of the reasons why the poverty level has gone down, because you've been able to get more money in people's pockets. Also, with the way the rent assist works, there's been an increase every year in terms of the dollars and cents. So just to pack it down a little bit further, when we came to office, when the NDP were running things, for instance, under the rent assist program, two-person with a single adult and one child were getting under kind of the non-EIA rent assist and rent assist. They would be getting about $758, and that's on July of 2016. So just when we came to office, now they're getting about $992. So that's actually increased by about 30.9%. So clearly there has been two things that have been happening here. Number one, if you're 650,000 of the property owners here in the province of Manitoba, you're getting a good benefit. And second of all, if you're a renter, you're also getting a benefit, clearly even in your constituency. A renter that's at the location that we had is about $68 better under our plan than status quo NDP plan.
The member for Fort Garry.
Well, I'm glad the minister brought up 110 Adamar, because I think that's a great example. I've been getting numerous complaints from that building of above guideline rent increases, and a number of my constituents being rent-evicted from 110 Adamar. And I think it just highlights the callousness of what's going on here. So the minister failed to answer my question, and so I'll ask it again. Does the minister believe that this tax reduction that gives the average landlord $1,700 while the renter loses a benefit is fair? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, I would say that our plan is better than the NDP status quo plan. And I guess my concern probably is really to the member, because you are part of the Residential Tenancies Commission. And under your watch, there's over 2,079 above rent guidelines. Every 100% of these were approved. So the concern that I have is, you seem to be making some decisions when you're in your position of responsibility, but now you seem to be running away from those decisions, which is unfortunate. But what I can say is, under our plan, there's 650,000 Manitobans are going to be better off because we've got a 25% reduction in terms of their education property taxes. That's going to go up to 50% next year. So those people are going to be better off. And in our plan, because of the rent increase, putting a freeze on it for 2 years under places, places that are even in your constituency are better off. I also did the Leader of the Opposition just make sure I wasn't just kind of picking on one member in terms of making sure, the benefits I'm showing the people in your constituency are better off, but also the member for Fort Rouge. Look at the penthouse towers at 71 Rosalind Street. Under our plan, where you have a rent freeze, and you also have, again, the $31 million that are going to the rent assist program, that renter is going to actually be about $110 better than under the NDP status quo plan. So I would suggest and argue that renters as well as property owners are better off under our plan than your plan.
The member for Fort Garry.
Well, unlike the minister, I've never, ever ordered the increase of rent on any Manitoban at any time. And I certainly invite him to come down with me to 110 Adamar and talk to my constituents who are being rent-evicted, who are seeing their rent skyrocket 20, 30% in a single year, and explain to them how they're better off. Can I get a commitment from the minister that he will do that? He will come down to 110 Adamar and meet my constituents and explain to them how they're better off under this rigging of the tax system.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you. I would also invite that member to come meet with the 658,000 Manitobans that got an education property tax. Might be more of a, might be a discussion, a tough discussion when you say that your party and particularly yourself voted against education property tax cut that could be in the tunes of close to $500 for individuals. I mean, there isn't just renters in your constituency. There's also people that own property that's there. So there's two benefits. There's the 650,000 people that got a property tax cut, which you didn't support. And then under our plan, under the renters specifically, whether your constituency or Fort Rouge or wherever constituencies, they're better off under our plan than your plan.
The member for Fort Garry.
Will the minister come with me to 110 Adamar and explain himself directly to these tenants who are being rent-evicted? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, we consult with everyone through our budget process. That was the problem under the NDP, that you never consulted with Manitobans. So we, part of our budget sessions, consulted with close to 30,000 Manitobans in the process. We went to all corners of the province. We went in Winnipeg. We went to a variety of areas. This year was a little bit different than normal, just because of the fact that we're in a virtual setting. We would like to get back to where we're able to go and meet with Manitobans. But I encourage you to join me, a part of those budget consultations. We can meet some of the 658,000 Manitobans that got an education property tax reduction, about, again, a 25% reduction. They're going to see that again next year happen for a 50% reduction in it. So we think that makes entire sense. And, we would also encourage the member to, consult, and you can come have a discussion with the 2,900 more people that are part of the rent assist program. We could house them all at the convention center or maybe a small venue now that we're able to get back to watch concerts, and have a discussion with them of why you didn't support that when your government was in power, and now that they're supported. Those are some of the reasons why specifically the poverty levels come down. It was the child poverty capital, of course, under the NDP, and that's changed under our government. So we've seen the poverty levels gone down. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for some of that, there's like 32,000 less children living in poverty, because of some of the changes we've made, and also because the Canadian child benefit, that's part of it. So I encourage you to come out and meet those 650,000 Manitobans that are seeing a check in their pockets where they're able to invest specifically during the time of a pandemic.
The member for Fort Garry.
Well, I certainly have to correct the minister. He's looking at some outdated data. The latest data from Manitoba is showing that child poverty is on the increase, and it certainly has to do with these government's policies. It's sad testimony that this minister is not accountable. He will not meet directly with Manitobans who his decisions are hurting, is making their lives harder, making them less affordable, and he doesn't have the courage of his convictions or a belief in his policies to defend them on the doorsteps of 110 Adamar to the people who are being rent-evicted. So I don't think I'll get a different response from this minister. I think courage is not one of his strong suits. But if he changes his mind, there is an open invitation to come to that building with me and meet the people whose decisions you're affecting their lives with. Now, I'll ask this minister, residential and farm properties have an average rebate of $358. Commercial landlords have an average rebate of $1,700. Does this minister believe that's fair?
Before I recognize the Honourable Minister, I'd like to ask him to direct all his comments through the chair and avoid using the term you. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Listen, you know what? I've been thinking about it. I want to apologize to the member from Fort Garry. The figures that I put on the record are inaccurate. It wasn't 30,000 people that we consulted. It was actually 51,000 people through engagemb.ca. We've heard 51,000 participants in our 2001 budget process, where that be online, telephone, town hall meetings, public engagements, and all these types of measures. So we have listened to a pretty good subsection of Manitoba. We always want to listen to more. And so what I would say is that there's 658,000 Manitobans that got an education property tax. They can, at least under our government, while we're in power, that they're going to see a secondary piece of 25% reduction for next year's. What we tried to do with this is, number one, whether you're a residential owner, right, you get a 25% reduction if you own a house or what have you. If you're a business, right, there'd be a 10% reduction. So it wasn't the same 25% level that's there. And we have made substantial investments. We've made sure that the rents are staying low by putting that, into a kind of a rent freeze, I guess, if you will. And we've also built into the guidelines, the above rent guidelines, that wasn't there when you were co-chairing it or being involved in the commission, where they have to take the consideration of the amount of money which they save from the education property tax before they make any decisions about the 2,000, above rent guidelines. So we think that the policy does make a lot of sense. There's benefits to owners and benefits to renters. There's benefits to farmers, and quite frankly, there's benefits to business as well, which is important because we know during the pandemic the businesses have been struggling. And so we think that providing some supports to kind of all Manitobans in so many different ways, the categories I've laid out, will help benefit them. And probably, although there's the unemployment level is still far too high here nationally, here in Manitoba it's been a little bit better. We're leading the country right now, about 5.6% unemployment rate. But some of the policies we've taken, this could be one of them. Is helping to recharge the economy. So we're going to continue to do that. We're looking to make life more affordable for Manitobans, not less affordable.
The member for Fort Garry.
Well, obviously, Minister, that this policy has the opposite effect. Now, I want to turn to another issue here. Minister Wasco on Wednesday, and this is a quote from Hansard, said, thank you, my friend from St. Vital, for the question. So in regards to the process, in regards to any type of whether it's labor relations or things along those lines, we in the department, we actually don't get involved in that we would have to be potentially a question for the Department of Finance. And that was a response into a question about mandate letters to post-secondary. And your colleague, Minister Wasco, said that that was your responsibility. So I'm wondering, as the minister who is responsible, was any mandate letter or other forms of directive sent to the University of Manitoba or other post-secondary institutions in relation to their bargaining?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, we appreciate, both management and labor part of this process. We encourage everyone, obviously, to be at the back at the bargaining table. And agreements are always preferable if you can have an agreed upon agreement. The government is committed to kind of a balanced approach between labor and management. Recent agreements show our commitment to balancing a fair wage and fair negotiations, but that process is ongoing, so I'm not going to comment further on the recent agreements with the nurses, just in respect to their process. We aren't going to take sides one way or the other. We want to make sure, and I think Manitobans would expect us to take a middle ground. We're obviously not the employer here, but we do encourage all parties to come together at the table, and our hope is that there could be an agreement moving forward. And we're seeing some agreements globally out there, which we think is important. To mention the process that we started out, that's been the exact same process that's been in place for many years under the NDP government as well as our government, and that has not changed at all since we've come to office.
The member for Fort Garry.
So I wonder if the minister confirmed, has a mandate letter or any other form of directive been sent to the University of Manitoba or any other post-secondary institution for their bargaining process?
Before I recognize the Honourable Minister, we've been made aware by the Hansard Recorder that the audio coming from the Honourable Minister's office is not very clear, and we were just wondering if the Minister would have a headset that perhaps he could use, or maybe get one of his staff to get him one, because it would make it a lot easier for us to hear the Minister in this room here. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we're going to look for some earbuds or something I can use. So I guess we'll kind of continue on this path for just a little while. So we will endeavor to check our records in respect to that. But what I can indicate is that, we do appreciate, both organization, labor and management. Those are tough decisions. We encourage everyone at the bargaining table. It's a little disappointing that the member wants to get involved in that discussions. I think that there is discussions that are continuing to go on. We have a balanced approach to labor and management, and recent agreements clearly show that ours is a government that does listen and can reach agreement with different organizations. We're not going to be like the leader of the opposition, where we clearly demonstrate our bias by these types of negotiations by walking the picket.
The member for Fort Garry.
So if I've heard the minister correctly, a minister of the Crown has no idea whether his department has sent a mandate letter to the largest educational institution in Manitoba with their upcoming bargaining, where there's a cloud of a strike vote hanging over it. Do I have that right? Neither him or any of his senior executive staff are in a position to give a simple yes or no answer today, and they have no handle on what's happening in their own department. Do I have that correct?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So we'll endeavor to get the information back to the member by the end of the session here today.
The Honourable Member for Fort Garry.
I appreciate the undertaking by the minister. Obviously, there's some urgency to this because the University of Manitoba Faculty Association is set for a strike vote later this month, citing government interference. I'm wondering if the minister, who's not aware whether he sent a mandate letter in his own department, would he, on the record today, commit that if one has been sent, it will be rescinded and he will allow free and fair open bargaining without any directive or mandate from the province of Manitoba? Will he make that commitment here and now?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our process has not changed since the lease from the previous government in terms of the approach with labor negotiations. I can tell you that is obviously those discussions are with the employer and employee, so that work is ongoing. It's unfortunate that the member is trying to insert himself politically in these negotiations, but I can tell you that that is being discussed, obviously, at the bargaining table, and I think, quite frankly, that's the appropriate place. We've seen some, obviously, agreements with government just in the last number of weeks. We're respectful of that process. We're not going to comment on that until, of course, the agreement has been settled. But our process is exactly the same as it was under the former NDP government.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm glad to hear that the minister is committed to staying neutral and not be involved at all in the bargaining process at University of Manitoba. Of course, that means no directives, no mandates, nothing from his department that could influence or cause the management at University of Manitoba to become entrenched in a position. And so again, given his stated neutrality, will he commit today on the record that no mandate letter, no directive, and no interference will occur from his office in relation to the upcoming bargaining session? And if he sidesteps, refuses to answer that question, Can you put on the record why you're refusing to make that commitment, given what you've already stated?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our process is exactly the same under the former NDP government it is today. There's been no change in terms of that. I can say it is disappointing, of course, that the member is trying to get on sides, and for a member that's trying to get into government and be whether it be a minister of the Crown or his government changes, I would suggest that's a dangerous process, a dangerous precedence to set when you have leaders of the opposition that are walking the picket lines, clearly taking one side of the issues or not. I'm assuming that, I'm hoping that probably wouldn't be the case once they get into government. But I can say that our process is exactly the same under the former NDP government it is today. So I'm going to refer him back to the answer I gave last question.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister can explain why he won't commit today to ensuring that there's no mandate letter or directive from his department in relation to this bargaining situation. If he could explain his rationale.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Again, to the member, our process is exactly the same that was under the former NDP government. Our approach, we appreciate what the faculty does at the University of Manitoba, the education they provide. We appreciate the management as well, the employer. We encourage everyone to get back to the bargaining table to reach an agreement. Obviously, it's preferable if you can have a agreed upon agreement that's done at the bargaining table. That's really where it's supposed to be done. And our government is committed to a balanced approach between both labor and management. That is our approach we've taken. And quite frankly, we think it's the right approach. We've seen some success lately at that. So we want to see that process happen. And we're not going to be like the leader of the opposition, where we're starting to walk the picket lines, picking one side or the other. I think taxpayers would want even and fair process. And that's exactly what we've done and we'll commit to doing.
The member for Fort Garry.
I see the minister just sort of reiterated the Brian Pallister approach to labor relations in Manitoba that we've had for the last 5 years. So do I take from his comments that he believes that that is the right approach in Manitoba and that he's going to maintain the Brian Pallister approach to labor relations and we're going to steady as she goes and there'll be no changes from this new government?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, we have a plan, of course. And we know that the NDP have no plan. In fact, it looks like they're making it up on the fly, which I think is a dangerous and, quite frankly, a risky approach to government when you don't have a plan and you're just making it up. I think even some of the commentators out there in newspapers have identified that the NDP really have no plan. But what I can tell you what our plan does, under a PC plan, it reduces taxes. We know the NDP will jack taxes up. We know that under our plan, we'll reduce the deficit under 8 years. We know that the NDP love deficits and are going to increase the deficits. We know under our plan, we've reduced poverty and we're going to continue to boost poverty. And under the NDP, they had, of course, with the child poverty capital of Manitoba, or rather Canada, in fact, North America. We also know that the number of kids in care have actually gone down by about 8% under our government. And we know that they had some of the highest number of kids in care of all nations. Now, there is some difference. What we have in our plan, important to have a plan as opposed to the NDP, is the healthcare funding has actually gone up in our plan by about $1.1 billion. And we know the NDP's funding for healthcare wasn't as important to them. We know education funding has dramatically gone up under our government, and we've also committed to over 20 new schools. That didn't happen under the NDP government. We also know that money for mental health has dramatically gone up under our government, whether it be agreements we signed and monies that are on the table to address mental health. And of course, that didn't happen. So there's a difference between our governments, of course. One has a plan for these things and one doesn't.
The member for Fort Garry.
Well, I think the minister's answer made it very clear that he fully supports the Brian Pallister School of Labor Relations is going to continue exactly in the same vein. And although the players may have changed around the table, the attitude is very much present and the same. I'm going to ask you to turn to page 24 of the 2020-2021 public accounts. It breaks down the budget and the actuals for strategic infrastructure. And as Minister, you'll note that roads, highways, bridges, and flood protection was underspent by a whopping 128 million. Health, education, and housing was underspent by an eye-catching 209 million. And the overall strategic infrastructure was underspent by 525 million. That's certainly a broken promise from the budget that said that no less than $1 billion would be spent on strategic infrastructure. We're looking at clearly a 50% failure on that promise. So I'm wondering if the minister could provide a list of budgeted projects, amounts spent, and deferred projects from the past fiscal year.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and our government is very much committed to strategic infrastructure. That's why, and specifically when you're coming out of a pandemic, we think making important investments in infrastructure is really important. There's been numerous announcements recently, things like the ISIP funding for the water treatment center. There's been funding for the Waverly West Community Center. There's been funding for the St. James 55 Civic Center project, I think 13 million. I think the Waverly West was somewhere in the neighborhoods of $80 million. There was monies that was dedicated towards important wastewater projects out of the RMF Stanley and as well as Port Prairie. So we're very proud of the fact that we invested $1.6 billion on infrastructure this year. If you look at some of the important areas, which we think is important, over 90% of the money was spent for roads and things like the maintenance of roads. Really, really important. So that's important. 83% of all education funding was there. We've got a commitment to build 20 new schools that should have been done a very long time ago, but wasn't. We also committed to a variety of maintenance types of projects under the NDP government. They used to, like to introduce this new spending, but they didn't take care of the existing infrastructure. And so we have, I believe there's been close to 8 new schools where new HVACs have been set up. That important, obviously, during the pandemic. That, along with the 20 new schools, there's upwards of 28 new schools are going to have great new ventilation systems. We've spent more on strategic infrastructure, more than the NEP ever did, except for 1 year. The 1 year, of course, was their election year. So we're committed to infrastructure spending. The strategic infrastructure spending, the $500 million that we allocated, is being spent over a three-year time period.
The member for Fort Garry.
So would the minister commit to providing a list of budgeted projects, amounts spent, and deferred projects for the past fiscal year?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
If the member could ask the question one more time, I think it was listing of the projects. Which are you talking about? The ISIP projects? Or are you talking about a listing, kind of a variance of what was spent? I mean, variance for the most part. There's two things. Number one, there's some delays as it relates to Lake St. Martin. As you may recall, there's still ongoing environmental issues and consultation that happen with the federal government. And so that area, there's about $101 million allocated. I think, I believe 17, somewhere right around there was spent on that. So there's obviously an under expend there. There was, because of the pandemic, some issues getting into the health facilities, the hospitals, personal care homes, these types of things. As I'm sure you can understand, with the pandemic happening, you can't have access to a lot of these places because of it. But the health expenditures is mainly related to IT types of projects that are there. So that's not sure if that's exactly what you wanted, but there's some information for you.
The member for Fort Garry.
To clarify, what we're seeking is, of the $525 million that has not been spent, if there could be a list of the budgeted projects that make up that amount, the amount that was spent on those projects, and what projects were deferred from the last fiscal year.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, like, $1.6 billion, right? I want to say there's hundreds of projects in all different areas, right? That are either being completed, or ongoing. Like some projects are kind of multi-year programs. So you may have spent, if it's a $150 million project, maybe you spent $50 million this year, and there's 2 years out that happens. So I don't have a listing here of each and every project where it's at. If the member would like, I could run through each of the areas related to the public accounts document where there was a variance. I mean, I could provide that for the member if he likes.
The member for Fort Garry.
I can certainly understand if the minister and his staff aren't prepared to provide a list on the fly. The question is whether you will undertake to provide us a full list for review after this hearing.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, we are, we're trying to figure out what the best approach to this would be. Like literally there is hundreds of projects out there. So would the member, probably on major projects, we could obviously provide information on what major projects would be. But, there could be a $1 million project here and there that's there. I don't know if that's the information you want or, globally I can do this. I don't know if I can provide, it literally would be hundreds of pages long to provide a listing of these. And then some of them, for instance, maybe projects in might be phased over 3 years, right? It's a long-term project. So You know, I guess globally, what I can say is there hasn't been any projects that have been canceled. You know, globally, for the most part, there's some reasons that there's been some delays. So if there's specific areas maybe that you'd like us to focus in on, we could, but it's going to be really hard to assemble a list of all the projects, and where they're at, because just quite frankly, there's a lot of projects that are ongoing, right? Maintenance and all that sorts of stuff. So I'm just trying to narrow it down for something that's usable, that you want and you have a right to ask for, but that isn't kind of, something that's really hard to put together.
The member for Fort Garry.
Minister's question, we would want all the information that you can provide. Your government officials obviously know what projects are planned, in what stage they are, and what money's been spent or not spent. The information is there. It's just whether the political will is to actually be accountable and transparent and provide that to the public. So I'll leave that, and whatever the minister is willing to give us, we will take, and more is better than less.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't really have a response to that. We'll endeavor, we'll take that under advisement and we'll refer that back.
The member for Fort Garry.
This is, as you know, well-known, Minister, this isn't the first year that your government has underspent strategic infrastructure. In fact, there's a pattern that year after year, that's what happens. In fact, you can set your watch by it. And I'm wondering if you could tell this committee, why is that? Why can't this government actually spend its strategic infrastructure budget and misses it every single year?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess probably the same question may go back to the member, just looking at the recent years. I noticed the former NDP government in 2011 undershot their infrastructure budget by $368 million. In 2012-13, $412 million underspent. In 2013-14, $260 million. In 2015, they were actually on track that year, $96 million. In 2015-16, just the year, right at the election time, they underspent their budget for $423 million. And so I guess what I would say is there's reasons all the time of why some projects may be delayed. I can tell you this year, these are some generalities, but for the most part, Lake Manitoba Outlet Channel project delays area resulted in delays in federal environmental approvals, and COVID-19 pandemic restrictions limited travel related to consultations. Water-related infrastructure, heavy rain events and diversion of internal resources to manage floods resulted in a reduction of other capital works during the construction season. In terms of education, delays in completion of Red River College Innovation Center. There was obviously some funding challenges, which we've addressed, and COVID-19. Efficiency Manitoba reduced the delivery of in-home and in-business programs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and public health restrictions, as well as there's a postponement of the capital acquisition for 2021-22. And liquor and lotteries due to casino closures and reduced revenue projects were canceled or deferred to maintain cash flow during the pandemic. So that kind of, for the most part, gives some of the explanation. But, again, globally, it's a large to do with this Lake Manitoba outlet, and because we couldn't get in some of the health facilities.
Before I recognize the next question, I was just wondering if the minister has been able to locate a headset or earbuds or something, because Hansard is having difficulty getting all of what the minister is saying, and to make sure that they have a proper transcript. If the minister could please find a set of headphones or something, that would be greatly appreciated. The member for Fort Garry.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the minister could tell us, under the current budget before the House, there's a commitment by your government of $1.2 billion in strategic infrastructure in this current fiscal year. Would you be able to provide us with a list of budgeted projects and money spent to date?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so generally, because it's just really, kind of the end of Q1, although, we're obviously technically into Q2, obviously. And construction season is just, at least for the summer portions of things. Now that more impacts kind of roads and bridges and that sort. It's really too early to say, what's on track and what isn't. I think by mid-year review or report that we bring out, that has more indications on where things are going. Like what happens this time of year too is, if there is money that is left in certain departments, I'll give you an example, let's say on infrastructure, what we do is we ask the department to come back and say, okay, is there some additional projects you can do? If you can't, maybe there's a delay, and there's always going to be some delays in some projects. But there could be some examples where you can, do additional work. So an example would be infrastructure. The reason why this year, in the last couple of years, we've been pretty good on the road budget and the maintenance budget is because we had infrastructure kind of came in at the end of summer and we said, okay, well, what work can you do over winter, right? Past the construction season. And they said, gravel, we can do a lot more gravel roads. So what we do this time of year is if there is areas that are trending down, then we kind of, move money around, I guess I would say, to certain projects. A lot of them would obviously be, incorporated in the budget documents, or there's certain areas you can maybe do a little bit more work. So I guess I'm saying it's really too early right now, but I think by the mid-year report, we should have a better understanding of, which projects are tracking behind. Some things like, example is things like Lake St. Martin, right? The channel project, right? We have, I think, $101 million allocated this year's budget. So some things are a bit out of our control. Some things aren't. There's also, depends on agreements. So I'll give you an example with the ISIP dollars. That's, of course, the federal provincial $1 billion fund that funds kind of like roads, it funds, kind of wastewater treatment plants, like recreational, these types of things. We're a bit at the discretion of the federal government too with this, because what happens is even for those types of projects, and Mr. Heller would probably have some better, he could provide more details on each of the projects, but we submit our list to Ottawa, and then it has to go through their federal treasury board and cabinet. So we did that last summer. For the most part, there's kind of a back and forth with the officials. And then all of a sudden, there's a lot of else that happens. This year, there was a federal election, and this isn't anything against, the current government that's there. But what ends up happening is there's kind of a hurry up and wait thing with a lot of the projects. And then all of a sudden, they get the project out the door, whether that's, before the election or not. But, just with that being said, with ISIP dollars, we were able to make announcements, I think, on Portage de Prairie wastewater, the RMS Stanley wastewater. Those are hundreds of millions of dollars. Things like the North End Treatment Center with the city of Winnipeg, two of the kind of recreational project, one being the Waverly West. It's a big community center. I think it was like $80 million. And then one was the Sturgeon Heights, or it was actually the 55 plus center, is about 13 million. We had kind of an agreement with all three levels of government. So a long story short, some are in our control, some aren't.
But there has been quite a bit of announcements, just the ones I kind of listed off really in the last 2-3 months. So those are timing that happens. Now, some of those projects, if we're involved in it, it gets categorized as strategic infrastructure. If it's a grant, for instance, like maybe to the city of Winnipeg or to others, it's categorized under kind of an operating grant, I guess, if you will, just because of the accounting of it. So long story short, we'll have a better indication after the mid-year review as opposed to Q1, just kind of a better trend line of what's happening in the construction season.
The member for Fort Garry.
So if I take the minister's comments, you're refusing to provide a list of all budgeted projects that are supposed to be undertaken this year and their current money that's been spent on those projects. Do I have that correct?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
No, you're completely wrong. I didn't say that at all. That was your words, not mine. What I endeavored to say is that there's a trend line that happens in Q1, and there's a better sense on where projects are after Q2 for the reasons which I'll get you to refer back to my last answer of why it's a better trend line in the mid-year. So I didn't say that at all. That was your words, not mine.
The member for Fort Garry.
So given that I had misinterpreted your words, I take it I now have your undertaking that you will provide a complete list of budgeted projects for the current year and the spending to date. Do I have that correct?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
What I'll endeavor to do for the member is once Q2 does come out, what we're calling now the mid-year report, that endeavors to provide kind of where we're tracking on all expenditures, not just infrastructure, but where we're spending on health or education or whatever categories the member or the media obviously want. That's a public document. Generally what I do is I do a press conference. More specifically, I think if there's some there's some abnormalities from where we're going. What I can say is that after Q1 on a global scale, with we're pretty much on track. I think we're $34 million above where we anticipated, but the deficit's dropping from about 2.1 billion in public accounts to about 1.5-ish. So we provide all that information, and like we do every year, we're absolutely committed to providing all that information in the mid-year report.
The member for Fort Garry.
So I'm taking from your comments that you're prepared to undertake to provide us a list of budgeted projects for this current year, including spending to date. And I have that correct. That's my understanding. You are going to undertake to give us that list. Yes?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I'm going to refer you to my previous comment.
The member for Fort Garry.
So I will take that as a yes. When can we expect to receive that document?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
We provide an update. The government provides an update on Q2 that goes through everything from operations, where the dollars are being spent. What is important this year is we put away about $1.2 billion in money for COVID supports. And so we identified that. We highlighted that in our Q1 report, and in our Q2, a part of the normal process that would happen under our government and other governments is we report on all these types of matters at the Q2 session. So we're absolutely committed to that same process we've been involved in for many years.
The member for Fort Garry.
The minister knows full well that I'm not interested in him undertaking to give me the Q2 report, which is delivered to my mailbox. What I'm asking for an undertaking for is for a list of strategic infrastructure projects that are anticipated this year and how much money has been spent to date. Is the minister refusing to provide that information? And if so, why is he refusing to disclose that information?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, we're absolutely committed to providing as much information as we can. There's kind of a standard process that happens. in respect to all avenues. We do it in Q1. We do it in the mid-year report that identifies, where we're spending money, whether it be COVID, whether it be kind of departments, whether it be strategic infrastructure. We do that in Q3, and we obviously do that in public accounts. We just went through a process where we released all the information on public accounts for the year, and that provides all the information for members. So we're absolutely committed to the process that we've been involved in. We want to make sure that people have as much information as they can. And quite frankly, we're proud of the fact that on our restated numbers, we're pretty much bang on what we anticipated through public accounts. And Q1, as we just identified, and a lot of this information the member is referring to, that gets categorized and gets reported on under Q1, our obligations to report those information. So yes, we want to provide as much information as we can.
The member for Fort Garry.
So it's obvious this minister is refusing to release that information. So I'm going to ask him, what is he hiding and why?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
We're providing all the information we can. We just went through a process where we released public accounts that went through every dollar, every cent. That was money that was reviewed by the Auditor General. Obviously, the Auditor General signed off on this. We're very happy that some of the qualifications that we've had in years past have been resolved. And so what we commit to do, and we do on a yearly basis, is we provide all the information of where the government's trending. Now, when you come through Q1, there's a trend line, right? This is what we're tracking. Now, things happen throughout the year. Same thing with Q2, or what we call the mid-year review, and the Q3. Where we say there's a tracking, this is where we're tracking. Now, again, sometimes projects happen quicker, sometimes they happen later on. So we're committed to all the information that we would normally provide, whether it be your government previously or our government. We're absolutely committed to providing all that information.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister could give us an update on how many employers applied for the Manitoba Pandemic Sick Leave Program.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the sick leave program, there's been over 2,469 people that have applied and got the benefit.
The member for Fort Garry.
The minister used people. I take it he means employers. I just want to make sure that I have that statistic right.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, it's 2,500 employees or 2469 employers. And we believe it's probably about 5,000 people have benefited from the sick leave program that we introduced. I do want to reference the fact, of course, the federal government has the two sick leave programs that are in place. One was for a caregiver. I'm using the names wrong, but there's a caregiver support one, and another program kind of related if they had to take some time off for COVID relief. So there's the two federal programs, and the money and how we establish this program, I guess, is there's kind of a lag between when you can apply. So we figured out what that dollars and cents would be. So again, about 2,400, almost 2,500 businesses have applied, and we think it's about 5,000 people that have benefited from the program.
The member for Fort Garry.
How many businesses applied and were rejected, or has every single business that applied been accepted in the program? And what I mean by that is, he said there's 2,469 employers that benefited from this. Was there 2,469 applications, or were there more and some got rejected?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Of that, again, the 2,469 are businesses that applied. So again, the number is somewhere around 5,000. If you applied and you hit the criteria for the program, then you got accepted. So 100% of people that met the criteria got accepted into the program. Our government is very proud of the fact that on a basis, I'll give some numbers here, there's been about $407 million of supports for individuals. So of that, 368,000 individuals got some sort of support in the pandemic. And that kind of related to things like the risk recognition, where people would get, I think it was about 80,000 Manitobans would get, about $1,500. There's the caregiver supports. There's a whole bunch of others. Seniors that got 235,000 seniors that got, I guess it's like a $200 check. And others, if you're a disabled individual, you've got also a check for, I believe it's $200 as well. So all totaled, almost 31% of all the population of Manitoba above the age of 12, I believe, got some sort of support. 368,000 individuals, and that totaled about $407 million. For business supports, because I'm sure we'll go there next, $470 million of business supports. So that was 38,000 businesses of the 125,000 businesses in Manitoba got some sort of support through the Bridge Grant or the GAP program or the wage subsidy program or Healthy Hire or kind of some of the restaurant supports. And that represents about 31% of all businesses. So again, 31% of all individuals in Manitoba above the age of, I think it was actually above the age of 12, got some sort of supports, 31%. And of businesses, 33% of all businesses. So there was substantial supports. And what we're very proud of the fact is of the support systems for the business, or rather, business individuals, 96% of the dollars that were allocated were flowed out to individuals and businesses. So 96%, all dollars that we allocated flowed out. We were able to move dollars, obviously, within department lines. And so what you're seeing in public accounts is kind of the grand totals, I guess, if you will, but 96% of all dollars that were flowed out that were allocated were flowed out to individuals as well as businesses.
The member for Fort Garry.
So just to be entirely clear, has any employers applied and been rejected, or there's been 100% acceptance of every single application made?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. 100% of people that applied, that met the criteria, that were eligible for the benefit, got the support. Now, the program is actually somewhat administered through Economic Development and Jobs. So I'm not aware of anyone that has applied and didn't get the program, as long as they were hitting the criteria. So if you're eligible through the criteria that was set out, then you got the benefit. Now, there could be some lags, in some of the processing. My understanding is it was a pretty robust system where they didn't get the supports. But if you were eligible under the criteria for the program, yes, you got support.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister can tell us what was the total amount budgeted for this program?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to refer you to Q1, page 5. And so, as you can see, just about middle way through the page, the pandemic sick leave program, there's $3 million allocated. We have supported, as mentioned, about 2,500 businesses. We think around 5,000 people. Now, part of the program, you may recall from the press release, we didn't actually put a dollar figure down there, because what we figured is, if people need the support, we're going to give them the support. So we'd be able to move dollars and cents around. But what we have allocated here is $3 million. We'd be more than interested as a government to support more people if need be. And so that is our commitment here today.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister could tell us how much has been paid out to date of that $3 million allocation.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've allocated about 2.6 million as of mid-September. So that's not the latest, but it's pretty close, mid-September. Again, the program isn't over until I believe at the end of October. I don't have the exact date right here, and so that money has been allocated. Again, about 2,500 employees have entered into the program, supporting somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 employees.
The member from Fort Garry.
Again, I just want to make sure I understand the minister properly, because he used the word allocated. He told us 3 million was allocated in the budget, and then 2.6 million since September, he said was allocated. I take it he misspoke and he meant has been spent. And the follow-up to that is this program ends on October 29th. Is the minister planning to extend the program?
The Minister of Finance.
Just want to correct the record. We just got some updated numbers. So as of today, we paid out $3,096,000.
The member from Fort Garry.
As the minister just alluded to, this program ends on October 29th. Is this government planning to extend this program, or will it end on October 29th?
The Minister of Finance.
Okay, so just to clarify, so that is till October 4th, the $3,096,000. So we made a decision fairly recently about the healthy hire, kind of extending it out. So we haven't made a decision yet on that. We're evaluating. We'll make a decision on that fairly soon. It has been a good program, I think, for employers and employees. So these are types of decisions we will make. Obviously, we're making a decision in the next. Probably the next week or so, because obviously the deadline for the program comes up fairly soon. So we haven't made a determination on that yet, but I wouldn't say no, I wouldn't say yes.
The member for Fort Garry.
So I'm wondering if you can share with the committee what the issue is, because we're about to enter the fourth wave with the expiry of a sick leave program. So what's the hesitation? Why hasn't it been an easy call to just extend the program?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
No, we're evaluating that. We're monitoring it. So I don't think it's a difficult decision. Quite frankly, we probably, will need to review some of these programs. So that will be one that we'll be, taking consideration. If you ask my personal opinions on it, and, there's a process we go through to make final decisions on these things, but it seems like it's been a beneficial program in so many different ways. So we're going to make that decision in the near future. I think there's been some very good benefit to this program. So I'll leave it at that, but we just haven't had made a decision. I think there's some time obviously to do such, and we'll probably do that in the next, probably over the next week or so.
The member for Fort Garry.
Now, on page 13 of the Residential Tenancies Commission annual report, it reads, and I quote, the commission upheld orders on 94 units in 26 buildings and varied orders on 523 units in 14 buildings. I'm wondering if the minister can break this down further. Were the 96 upheld orders and the 523 varied orders all above guideline increases?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, Mr. Chair, so we're endeavoring just to kind of get that information. I should be able to get it to you probably by the end of the meeting here or in the next few minutes. Our officials are looking for that. What I can say is the process hasn't changed since member was a part of that, of course. The above, there's the RTB process, and if people have want to appeal it, for the most part, it goes right to the commission. And so, of course, in the past, over the last 6 years before we came to office, there was over 2,079 above rent guidelines approved, which is really disappointing, but was. And so what our government is proud of the fact is a whole bunch of things. Number one, during the pandemic, when people needed the support, we had a rent freeze that was allocated. There was no evictions, and we were actually one of the first provinces to do that. I think one of the last to lift that order. What we also have done is we created a rent bank, which basically is kind of a ability for tenants that are struggling with their rents to kind of get a kind of a short-term loan, I guess, if it will. That would be part of that to help them if there's any issues that are there. Our government's very proud of the fact that, of course, we gave about $407 million of their own money through our budget to support individuals, or 338,000 Manitobans got some sort of support. We, of course, did things like freezing rent, like the rent controls obviously were in place for two particular years. And then also when people are considering the above rent guidelines, we said what you need to take into consideration is if landlords got some sort of break. It's kind of meshed out more in their operating expenses. So if they're able to save money in their operating expenses because they're not paying as much education property taxes, then that needs to be taken into consideration when they make their decision at the RTB. And I guess if they appeal, they could go to the RTC. But at the end of the day, the minister, there isn't something that I sign off on these rent, individual rent increases don't come to my desk. The member probably knows that he was a part of the commission. So that's an independent process, same process as it was under the NDP government.
The member for Fort Garry.
Wondering if the minister can tell us what the average percentage increase of above guideline increases there were in the previous year.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I've got information, and I'll read it out here. So between, maybe I'll start out from the beginning. I'll look at 2015 and then I will go to the 2020 year. So in 2015, the above rent guidelines or above rent guidelines increase. The applicants, like what they applied for on average was about 14%. What was granted under the member of Fort Garry and his committee was 12%. In 2016, there was the average, ask, I guess, if you all say it that way, request was for 15%. And what the member of Fort Garry and his commission came up with was 12.8%. 2017, it was asked was 12.9%. And what came down was 10.5 on average. 2018, it was 12.3. And then what was agreed to was 9.8. In 2019, it was 13%, and what was agreed to is 10.6. And 2020 was 13%, and what was agreed to was 11%.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if this minister finds it problematic that during a pandemic that so many Manitobans were subjected to substantial rent increases.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so what our government did is we're trying to make life more affordable for individuals. So what we did is we put a rent freeze on for 2021 and 22. We think that makes a lot of sense. What we also did is we increased the amount of money that flowed to the non-EIA rent assist budget. It went up by about $31 million. And what that actually means is about 2,900 people got supported under that program. We also established something called the rent bank, which was, let's say if tenants were struggling to meet their bills, it's kind of some flexibility for them to be able to kind of make sure they get the rent paid, and there's kind of a process going back and forth with it. Also, something that we think makes a lot of sense is on some of the rent, the amount of money that people get through EIA and non-EIA rent increase. I can go through the numbers, but essentially since 2015 or 16, the amount of money, there's a whole bunch of categories, like if you've got children or if you're kind of a dual citizen, that amount has actually gone up by about 30%. So I would say the rent freeze, we think, can help renters. It has in your constituency, and the member for Fort Garry or for Rouge's constituency, they're better off on our plan than yours. There's more money for the rent assist program, and probably about 3,000 more people supported under that program. The actual money has gone up by about anywhere between about 30% for those individuals. And we also established things like the rent bank to make it easier for individuals. We copied NDP BC in terms of the rent bank program. So we think all those things put together, really will help lower income individuals, whether you're living in a rental unit. That's also to augment the 658,000 Manitobans that got an education property tax cut. If you're sitting in the city of Winnipeg, you're a resident of Fort Garry, and you're an average homeowner, you've got about a check for about $481 back. That's going to double. It's going to double next year. So those are the items that we took in consideration, whether you're a renter or whether you're a property owner in the province.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister could update the committee on what the current number of full-time equivalents is in vital statistics, what the vacancy rate is, and where those vacancies are located.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yeah, okay, I'll answer it in two parts here. First of all, vital statistics, there's been issues with delays. Absolutely, there's been issues with delays. In fact, just to paint the picture for you of what we had to deal with, there's about 24,000 applicants that were delayed processing, and we got a plan together, and we've seen some pretty good results. So I'm going to give them to you. But essentially, we did two things. We increased the IT capacity, right? So that way they're processing things, and HR capacity that's there. And so of that 24,000 backlog, the 24,000, we've actually almost 100% caught up with that. There was actually only 43 left. So 99.99% of the backlog has been caught up in terms of like these vital statistics. And there's been about a 50% reduction in the wait times, right? So, wait times are there. I think we still need to do more work on this area, but there has been substantial work that has happened really even the last 3-4 months. The backlog is totally, for the most part, drained, right? And the wait times are down by 50%. So, we see it as a priority. The first is get rid of the backlog, which we did, 24,000. And the second phase is the turnaround time. We want to make sure it's better. It's improved by 50%. But it's still not there. To answer your question, the FTEs, we budgeted 44 FTEs.
The member for Fort Garry.
What is the current vacancy rate of those 44 FTEs?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yeah, so obviously, as I talked about the plan moving forward and what we worked on, the almost 25,000 backlog that's been basically dealt with, so they're back to normal levels. And the fact that we have been able to get 50% reduction in the wait times really is testament to the hard work the department has done. Right now, there is 30 filled positions, and of the other positions we're talking about, the 14, they're in various stages of hiring process right now.
The member for Fort Garry.
When we had this conversation in May, I think there was about 14 positions that were empty. Given that 4 or 5 months have now passed, how come those positions haven't been filled?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, I would suggest that there's been some pretty good progress here made, right? When you have a backlog of somewhere around 25,000 documents, and basically now, as of October 5th, 99.99% of these backlogs have been addressed. I think there's 43 left of the 24,864. And the fact that the wait times, which I think is crucial to people, have been reduced by 50%. I think these people are doing a wonderful job. And I think the fact that we are hiring these individuals to make sure we're at a full complement. There's always turnover with individuals and that sorts. But at the end of the day, results are important, and the results show that we have gotten rid of the backlog, and we have reduced the wait times by 50%. And we're hiring, obviously additional staff to make sure it's lined at a proper level. But there has been some pretty good turnaround on this, on vital statistics that we're very proud of.
The member for Fort Garry.
When the minister talks about 50% reduction in wait times, what was the wait time and what is it now? Because I'm getting calls this week from my office of people who are waiting 5 months to get birth certificates, marriage certificates. So what is the time, and how much has it? You said it was 50%. What is that in actual days?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
It has been reduced by 50%. So as you mentioned, actually we had about 6 months earlier this year, so that's far too long. It's been dropped to 3 months, and that's still too long in my opinion. So we need to continue to do this work. We've got the backlog, which is like the first part of the plan is, well, actually it's kind of the second part of the plan. The first part is to get the IT in place, the resources in place, Number two is to really get the backlog taken care of, right? The people that have been waiting on the backlog. And number three is to, or the third phase, I guess, is the turnaround time. So we want to, although it's decreased by 50%, that's not good enough. We still have more work to do in vital statistics. And so that's what we're endeavoring to do. And I think there's been some good progress made since we spoke last on the subject.
The member for Fort Garry.
I appreciate you saying that 3 months is too long. So I'm curious, from your perspective, Minister, what is the ideal wait period? What would be acceptable to this government? How long should people wait for a birth certificate or a marriage license? Or marriage certificate, rather.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
We would like it to get it down to 2 weeks, and that's part of our plan, is to get it back where there's a 2 week kind of lag, I guess, if you will, or kind of wait time. Now, if someone does need a process, rush, process, they need it right off the bat, they can get it within 3 days.
The member for Fort Garry.
Now, Minister, in the latest vital statistics report, I'll direct you to, let's see, page number 14 under Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. 2 years in a row, I think the language is identical. I think it's just been recopied. And it indicates that call to action number 17 that would enable residential school survivors and families to reclaim names changed by the residential school system by waiving administrative costs for a period of 5 years. I'm wondering why the identical passage is appearing in multiple reports, and what, if any, progress has been made on this, and is the government actually going to implement that recommendation, and when?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There has been some work done on this. There was some of the work was suspended because of the COVID-19 parameters that are there, but there is ongoing work to reestablish working with Manitoba Chiefs as well as with Ottawa. As you can appreciate, some of the records obviously are in Ottawa, whether it be for residential schools or the First Nations or Métis or 60 Scoop, and so that process is ongoing. Again, working with Manitoba Chiefs as well as Ottawa to make sure you get all the information assembled together.
The member for Fort Garry.
So I take it from the minister's comment that you're in agreement with that recommendation and you're attempting to implement it. when will Manitobans start seeing their vital statistics fees waived for that service?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Working with Metro Chiefs, working with Ottawa, we think that something should be in place by further on in the year, before the end of the year.
The member for Fort Garry.
Wonder if the minister can tell this committee whether any of the services functions at Vital Statistics have been contracted out at all this year.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There, of course, was an Auditor General's report that came out fairly recently. We obviously have hired staff. The vast majority of the staff, I think all the staff were kind of summer students, I guess, that did a lot of the catch-up work that's there. So there was no contracting out of any of that service.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister could tell us, give us an update on how much mining tax has been collected to date in the 2021-2022 fiscal year.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're tracking so far in the year, obviously it's still pretty early in the year, $3 million. And so obviously the mining tax is at 15%. There's also kind of I don't want to say a kicker, but I mean, there's also a 10%, saying the terminology right, but kind of a 10% kicker based on profits. The way the 15% is calculated, it's based on kind of expenses and revenues, I guess, for the most part. You know, when their capital expenditures hits their profits, it's calculated. But so far, year to date, it's around 3 million for the mining sector, and I'll be up there actually in Snow Lake, I think, in a few weeks. In the next number of weeks. You know, there's been some progress in the mining sector. There's been a lot of exploration happening, which is a good thing. Now there's more exploration happening that's obviously incorporated in their expenses, and that has an impact on the mining tax. Mr. Chair, would it be possible to ask the committee to take a 5-minute bio break at all? Would that be appropriate?
Is it the will of the committee to take a 5-minute break? Agreed and so ordered. Committee recess for 5 minutes. I'd like to bring the committee back to order. I see the minister is back. You're ready to go? The member for Fort Garry?
Thank you. Minister, the Ombudsman previously highlighted the delays in your department with its FIPA processing times. I'm wondering if you could update this committee on what the current average response time is.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so we've seen an expedited amount of FIPA requests that have come in. So we do acknowledge the fact that it's taking too long. We are kind of moving, I guess, pieces around to have the resources in place to do it as quickly as we can. And, we do obviously want to work with the Ombudsman to make sure that the information is provided in a timely fashion. I mean, some things take a little bit longer just because the information that you're trying to pull up, and some take a little bit less. So I'm not sure there's an average time, but it really depends on the application and what information they're looking for. And I certainly, would agree with the member and probably the Ombudsman that we need to get faster at providing that information back.
The member for Fort Garry.
I certainly can attest firsthand that this department is probably one of the worst offenders in the government. And the Ombudsman certainly had an average time that they were concerned with. So I'm wondering if the minister can provide us what the current average time is.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what Finance does is we coordinate a bunch of services. So we'll do kind of the coordinations for Finance, Executive Council, Civil Service Commission, Central Services, Crown Services, and other administrators for the all charities function. And so, I don't collectively have what the average is. I think that's something through the new Ministry of Legislative Affairs would have kind of, I guess, the global time frame. But, again, it's ours, although it's kind of assembled in finance, there's a whole bunch of departments that kind of feed into our numbers. And so we do recognize the Ombudsman has said, and we want to work with the Ombudsman to get the information to the people that are, putting out the FIPA requests in a timely fashion. So we're committed to moving in that direction.
The member for Fort Garry.
Wondering if the minister can update the committee on how the implementation of the Ombudsman's recommendations are going and when will they be fully implemented?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Just some clarity. So you're referring to the Ombudsman's, freedom of information request. That's what you're asking for.
The member for Fort Garry.
Yes, that's correct.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So those responsibilities actually have been taken on by the legislative and the new department. I'm going to say the name wrong, but Legislative Affairs. So they're kind of coordinating this approach. But I think globally, as a government, I can say that we're absolutely committed to ensuring that freedom of information requests are fulfilled in a timely way. Even though we may not be coordinating here in finance anymore, we're obviously going to work with Legislative Affairs to endeavor to make sure that these requests are fulfilled in a timely way.
The member for Fort Garry.
Well, as the minister knows, he has the inglorious distinction of being the only finance minister in Manitoba's history to preside over 2 credit downgrades of our provincial finances, something that before his government was unheard of. We also know that the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Federal Parliamentary Budget Officer, is saying that Manitoba finances are unsustainable. And even though there was 1 year of balanced budget, that has not upgraded our credit rating. So I'm wondering if the minister recognizes that it's his tax cuts to the wealthiest Manitoba that has put our finances in an unsustainable situation where we cannot afford the services we currently provide to Manitobans. So I'm going to ask the minister, is the plan to cut those services or is it the plan to restore fair taxation to successful corporations and the very wealthy Manitobans that have been cut?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I find the question almost comical. We know the, financial situation we were left by the NDP government. We know that they drove up the debt of Manitoba Hydro by over $10 billion by the reckless approach to some of the programs that avoided actually Public Utility Board going through them. I believe it was kiosk, or at least the bipolar didn't even go through the pub that's there that's driven some of the downgrades. Manitoba actually is one of the only provinces, in fact, was the only province in Western Canada that didn't get a downgrade during the pandemic. I mean, obviously, during the pandemic, it's been extremely challenging as a Minister of Finance, whether you're Manitoba, Ontario, or BC, wherever, predicting what was going to go on, not just on a public health basis, but just on a financial basis, because we had, move, quite frankly, hundreds of millions of dollars for support programs for businesses and individuals, and you name it, right? PPE, all this other stuff. So we're proud of the fact that we actually didn't get a downgrade. I think the bond rating agencies have said glowing things about our approach. In fact, I remember one of the bond rating agencies said that when we released our budget, that it was a very realistic approach. We know that over the last 4 or 5 budgets, what we've tried to do as a government is, come in under budget, right? Overperform. And that's happened each and every year. And that's been a credit of I think a lot of the hard work that we've had to go through for it. We, of course, are the only party in the legislature that supports a balanced budget legislation to get rid of the deficit in an 8-year time frame. We think that's realistic. We don't think it's we think it's doable. Now, our number one goal right now is the pandemic and make sure people are supported. But we do think an 8-year time period, and if you look at what the bond rating agencies would say, I think they would agree with you that having a long-term plan to get ourselves out of a deficit situation, because you have, obviously that's one of the areas that really drives debt. So having a plan in place that's there makes a lot of sense. And quite frankly, I think, managing the finances in a turbulent times has been a big challenge, again, not just for Manitoba, but other provinces. And the fact that we're the only ones that haven't got a downgrade, as other provinces like BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, and others have during the pandemic, shows that we're managing that process well. My one criticism with the federal government, I think for the most part, we've worked extremely well. I am, work well with Minister Friedland, and I consider her a friend. Actually, she's someone that's been very good at pushing for Manitoba projects. But my one criticism against the federal government is that there hasn't been a plan to get ourselves back into balance. Every government's doing what they can to support individual and businesses now, but you do need a plan to get yourself back into balance. And that's what we have, and that was supported, and was disappointed that the opposition voted against it.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister can tell us how much extra money has been spent on servicing the debt due to the 2 PC credit downgrades, and how much further Manitoba would be ahead right now without having to spend that money on interest. I'm wondering if you can give us that number.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, it's, so I don't even know where to unpack that one. We know the track record of the NDP and their dangerous decisions and risky decisions on the finances. And, if they weren't borrowing money, they were jacking up taxes on Manitobans, which we think is dangerous. They haven't, along any part of the way, supported any deficit reduction plan that's been in place. We actually did balance our budget prior to the pandemic coming to fruition. For the member to somehow say that it's our fault because the credit ratings is I don't think anyone in Manitoba would believe that. I mean, we clearly know, we know the track record of the NDP. We know what they did to things like the hydro debt. I don't even know what to say to the member. I mean, the reality is our debt servicing charges is about $1 billion a year. Went down a little bit this year just because of the fact that interest rates have gone down. It's really hard to answer the question when the member refuses to, agree with the obvious, the facts that we were left with a mess by him and his government. Maybe not him, but he was, his governing party at that point. The NDP left Manitobans in a really bad situation. We're proud of the fact that we cleaned up the mess. We've got a plan in place. If the member, has any concern about deficits, which I don't think he does, quite frankly, but if he did, he would have supported a plan to get yourselves back in a balance. And to answer the question of what, how will that impact our ratings, I gave you the amount of money that we're allocating towards that. But at the end of the day, you have bonds that go in the market. It really depends on what the interest rates and some of the lending that's in place. We've taken advantage of some of the what I'll call the century bonds. There's been 2 or 3, I think 2 century bonds that have been put in place that locks in long-term money for 100 years, really unheard of. And so that's really our plan going forward. I really encourage the member to get on board with our balanced budget legislation and support that and stop, voting to jack up taxes in all Manitobans.
The member for Fort Garry.
I want to talk to you about the political contributions tax credit. Since the changes in 2018, can you advise whether there's been an increase in political donations and how many Manitobans have maxed out the donations, meaning how many 5,000 person donors are there in Manitoba?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I'll refer the member to Elections Manitoba Annual Report.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister can break down the distribution by tax bracket for political contributions. How many in the top bracket, how many in the middle bracket, how many in the low bracket actually make donations to political parties. That's not in the report. That's information within the ministry. So can you advise what that breaks down to?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
We're going to take that question under advisement and we'll refer the information back through a table.
The member for Fort Garry.
Now that Bill 28 has been ruled unconstitutional, as the minister is aware, school boards are on the hook for tens of millions of dollars and interest in back pay for cost of living increases that didn't happen because, as you know, your government used that as a tactic to prevent that sort of fair negotiation at the board table. That's blown a huge hole in school board budgets, which have caused class sizes to balloon, teachers to be laid off. I'm wondering, is the minister going to take responsibility for that and reimburse school boards for the tens of millions of dollars that they now have to come up with under the current system?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And the member quite knows when he was chair of the Winnipeg School Division that he took a lot of irresponsible action, I guess I would say, on the financial basis, where he was jacking up taxes routinely. You don't have to go as far as Dr. Weems that did a report in terms of his nature of a school division. So I'm not sure I would necessarily use his background to use as an example. In fact, that probably would be the poster child of bad behavior when you're, a part of a school division, you're chair of a school division. But that's part of his legacy. What I would suggest is that our government is committed to $1.6 billion of new expenditures for operating and capital dollars. We're investing in 20 new schools. We're upgrading schools. I think there was 8 different schools on HVAC systems and stuff on just, COVID-related release that were done. So there's a lot of money that's being invested in the education system. Some of the divisions obviously are in different stages of their negotiations, and the Minister of Finance has, or rather the Minister of Education has ongoing discussions with these school divisions. But I can say as a government, we very much are committed to $1.6 billion of new expenditures and building 20 new schools.
The member for Fort Garry.
The minister in his mandate letter is tasked with reviewing urban reserves, to quote, to ensure equitable treatment of taxpayers. I'm wondering if the minister can give an update of has that review taken place? The minister's been in place for years now. What's the progress on this front? What's to be expected? Is there going to be legislation, et cetera? And what is this coded language, ensure equitable treatment of taxpayers? It sounds really troubling. I'm wondering if you can explain that.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
What's really troubling is your record on finances when you were chair of the Winnipeg School Division. That's really troubling because taxpayers were on the hook for all the taxes you jacked up every year. But I would say on the Urban Reserve, it's an important initiative for the government. We want to work with all parties, whether it be Indigenous communities, and make sure that there's...
I'd like to remind the minister to put his comments through the chair. We've discussed this a little earlier, and if we could refrain from the words of you and use the title of the person we were talking to. Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
No problem, Mr. Chair, and we know that the member's risky and dangerous approach to finances when he was chair of the Winnipeg School Division is something that I don't think makes sense to run the government here, but that's something that he'll have to, as part of his legacy. What I can tell you when we talk about urban reserves, we want a better relationship with Indigenous communities through reconciliation. We think this is a really important initiative, and that's why it was put in my mandate letter. We're ongoing discussions with Indigenous leadership and other organizations as it relates to that. The process that has been in place, I was actually involved when I was on City Council with the first urban reserve actually in St. James. It was an old Manitoba Hydro, I guess it was, location that was being transferred as an urban reserve. And, it worked out really well. What actually happens in that is there's a servicing sharing agreement that happens. And so basically the municipalities will kind of wrap up, what costs they would, normally have on a regular property, right? Whether it's property taxes and, servicing for garbage and all that sort of stuff, some of the services that would be in place. And it's considered as a service sharing agreement. So, that's kind of the ongoing process. And that's what actually happens once the service sharing agreement is in place. Then it goes to Ottawa, and Ottawa kind of makes the decision on the urban reserve, as I understand the process. But we certainly want to be involved and at the table, and our discussions are ongoing with Indigenous communities and federal government and municipal governments to make sure it makes sense. But again, my own personal experience has been wonderful. I think it's been great experience. There's jobs have been created. I know Yellowquill College has gone to the first urban reserve. They were there at one point anyways, through some of the training. There's gas bars, there's everything else. And it was a good arrangement. So we'd like to see other arrangements like that come to fruition here in Manitoba. So we want to make sure the process works well. And so we want to continue to consult with Indigenous communities.
The member for Fort Garry.
So what's the status of the review of urban reserves, and what is the policy that's going to be implemented by this minister?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
So we're in a listing process with Indigenous communities, and I want to make sure we recognize, the reconciliation piece, and we think these are great opportunities
for economic development for everyone, all Manitobans, all Canadians. And so we're very much committed to the process, but we're in the listing phase. And so, our hope is that we would have a policy in place sooner rather than later. And, we're going to have a new government here, of course, in Manitoba over the next month or so. And I know one of the goals of probably both of the candidates that are vying for that is to have a better working relationship with Indigenous communities. And so that is our hope. And so we'd like to kind of take that, continued approach, but ongoing enhanced approach to the table when we have those discussions with Indigenous communities.
The member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if you can shed some light on why your department underspent almost $3 million from the budget on your taxation unit, which is the one that includes audits, investigations, and collections. Why are you underspending by $3 million in that one area? It seems pretty critical.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there obviously is some vacancies in there, but there was also some move with deferrals. You may recall some of the business taxes, whether it be kind of the payroll tax or other types of initiatives that we kind of deferred just to give businesses some breathing room, I guess, if you will. And so I think at that point, we also made a decision not to penalize people if they were having some hard times with their cash flow bills. And so there were some deferrals that would happen. So there has been some work that has been deferred. But we obviously are working at an appropriate level. But again, there has been some work that's been deferred in regards to it.
The member for Fort Garry.
What's the current vacancy rate in that department?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
So we made a bit of progress since we met last as a committee to go through the estimates. I don't know the exact number what it was before, but I think it was hovering around 40%, somewhere around there. It might have been a little bit more or less north or south of that number, but it's around 25%. So we've made some progress, but there's still too many vacancies that are there. So we want to make sure that we're going to staff up, and we've got the budget appropriate to do that. It's just a matter of getting the right people in place. And work is ongoing in respect to that.
The member for Fort Garry.
When will that department be fully staffed?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we obviously budget to make sure we have appropriate level of staff. It really depends on the hiring process. And, when you hire people, there's also attrition that happens and there's turnover. There's people retiring. And
the Department of Finance tends to be, our workforce tends to be a little bit older than other departments. And so there is been a little bit more of a natural turnover just because of retirements that do happen. But we're endeavoring to hire as many people as we can to make sure we're fully staffed in respect to that. So it's hard to kind of put a place on it, but you ask my personal opinion, I'd like to see us, staffed up for sure, more than we are, but you obviously can't control some of the turnover when people are retiring and that sorts, but that's making sure we have a robust HR decision or HR process in place so we can hire those types of people to make sure they're staffed up and they're doing the appropriate work that is there for them to do is being done.
The member for Fort Garry.
Now, Minister, we received documents which show that you waited to recuse yourself for matters relating to Tiber River mid-February 2021. Media stories began emerging, and the court case against Tiber River began in the late fall of 2020. It's October 26th, to be exact. I'm wondering if the minister can offer an explanation to this committee why he waited so long to recuse himself from that situation.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, it's not surprising this member somehow starts to take personal attacks on individuals, but it's not surprising, quite frankly. We've seen this before in the House. That's more the nature of his personality more than anything else. What I can tell you is I took the appropriate action when the member tried to do a political stunt by raising this in the media. The Conflict of Interest Commissioner commented on this and said that I took all appropriate measures in respect to that nature. So I would refer to the comments made by the Conflict of Interest Commissioner.
The member for Fort Garry.
If the minister's actions were appropriate in February of 2021, why weren't they appropriate in October 2020 when this was all unfolding? Why did he wait a further 3 months to recuse himself?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Number one, I guess the option is to believe a member like yourself who are clearly starting to take personal shots, or you can believe the Conflict of Interest Commissioner who's commented on this in respect to the actions that I took. Clearly, I took the appropriate actions. If you'd like to ask the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, he's clearly made his comments in respect to this on the record. I don't really have anything more to say to that. I know the member likes to do these stunts, these political stunts, and take political personal attacks on individuals. I think that's unfortunate, but it really is his approach to politics, unfortunately. But I'll refer any comments in respect to what the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. So people have a choice to understand whether they believe the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, who said I took all the appropriate steps, or a politician like yourself, who clearly is in the midst of taking personal shots. That's been talked about at an independent officer like the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. So I refer any comments in respect to that to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner.
The member for Fort Garry.
It's my understanding that the member from St. Boniface wishes to ask a few questions, and I'll yield the remaining time.
The member for St. Boniface.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just had I'll try to keep, we don't have much time, but I was wondering, I know that there were, we had evictions, suspensions, basically eviction bans for a number of, at least for the first and second waves or parts of them. I was wondering, we were talking about bringing back a fourth, or that a fourth wave may be approaching and it's cold. I know that there have been issues with evictions that there's really two issues. One is that, is that people risk being made homeless, but the other is that it can risk driving up rent prices as well, right? Just the turnover means that people can then bring it up. So I was just wondering if I'd asked the Premier about this the other day in estimates, whether there's any consideration of bringing back an eviction ban if there were serious problems in the fourth wave.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess when the pandemic started, we were one of the first provinces to not just have an eviction ban, but obviously the wage, or rather the rent freeze that was part of it. That lasted quite a long time. In fact, other provinces kind of moved away from that. I think it was Saskatchewan and Ontario, and we kept it in place for quite a long time. We have taken it. Evictions aren't always related to arrears of payment, but sometimes they are. And so with that, we've tried to make some policy changes as it respects to supports for individuals. I mean, we talked about the 338,000 Manitobans that got some sort of support for individuals. We did talk about a new process with the rent bank, right? So it's kind of almost a line of credit, I guess, if you will, between the renters so they would have an ability to stretch out the dollars and cents there. And we froze, there's kind of essentially a rent freeze that's in place that's there. So to answer specifically on that element, that's the wage freeze. The member may also be, I guess, venturing into evictions. So we haven't made a decision in respect to that. I mean, we're always looking at options to support individuals, but probably the 2 or 3 items that I just mentioned are probably some good steps to provide a bit more flexibility for the financial needs. There is a process in place if someone's evicted for, criminality or, they're destroying, kind of the units, and that's kind of really handled through the appropriate means through our enforcement and through the RTB process. So that's really in their purview. So maybe leave it at that.
The member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier in the meeting, there was some discussion just about the changes to property taxes, and the minister was mentioning that there had been a number of studies about how it happened. The one question I had was about distribution. So it's sort of we know that we have numbers, sort of the number of people who are getting it, but is there a sense, or would the minister be willing to release any of those studies or make those studies available if they're not already? Just so we have a sense of, I'd say, the distribution, by which I mean, sometimes, you'll have one person who's paying $5 and have one person who's paying $500, and because that's a different question than the bulk numbers of averages. Or I was just wondering if there had been any distributional analysis and whether that was available.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There hasn't really been done any analysis on it. I mean, traditionally, I guess you would say, well, someone that may be living in an affluent neighborhood, for the most part, would be making more money, like has a higher, personal income taxes they're paying because they're making more money, or vice versa if you're lower income living in the lowers. But there is some abnormalities to it, right? So I'll give you an example that maybe it's someone that was, let's say they were a doctor, they're a high, earning doctor, for instance, but then they retire, but they may still be living in kind of a really big, house, right? So there could be, although their income has dramatically dropped, their personal income tax has dramatically dropped, they're still living in a big, maybe a big house until maybe they downgrade for the kids. Vice versa, it could be the same thing. It could be someone who's a farmer and, maybe they sell their farms and they they get $2 million for their, collected as income, I guess, for that year, and yet they're still living in a, farmhouse that they built in 1947. So I guess there's some abnormalities in there. So long story short, I don't think there's been an analysis done on that. And I think for the most part, you're right. There's probably trend lines there, but there's also, other circumstances where, you're living in a big house or small house and you're not necessarily in the categories that you think you may be with a personal income tax. And when we do our, our education profit, that goes out to property owners. So we don't, collect data on, how much you're making or whatever. It just goes out to whether you're a property owner, and there's obviously corresponding rent piece that we've talked about earlier on this meeting. So answer your question, there really hasn't been an analysis done.
The member for St. Boniface?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just had some questions. It was relying, about some of the numbers around workplace safety and health. I know that this came up a little bit earlier, but for 2021, let me just make sure I've got the right book here. This is from the main estimates and supplement. That workplace safety and health for 2021, it says it's
The member for St. Boniface, we've lost the audio with you. If you could.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm not. So page 23 of
Member for St.
estimates.
Boniface?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Page 23, main estimates, just to say that for the year 2021, workplace safety and health, it's $8,599,000, but in the public accounts, or the annual report, it appears to say $7,747,000, and there were some discrepancies with those numbers for the Manitoba Labor Board, the employment standards. So I was just wondering if the minister could explain them, or if he can't answer right now, since we're running out of time, if he would be willing to put that under advice, to get back to me later about it. Just there's a discrepancy, in between some numbers in the workplace safety and health branch for the year 2020-21.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yeah, our officials are looking for it. If they can get the answer in the minutes we have raining, I'll certainly bring it forward. But in the essence of time, I'll turn it back. If there's any other questions, we'll take it under advisement unless they can provide the information right now as we speak. So I'll take it under advisement.
The Honourable Member, the member for St. Boniface.
I yield my time.
Any more questions? Hearing no further questions, we will now proceed to consideration of the resolutions. At this point, we will allow virtual members to unmute their mics so they can respond to the question I will now call. Resolution 7.2, resolved that there be granted Her Majesty a sum not exceeding $5,372,000 for finance policy and legislation for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.3, resolved that there be granted to Her Majesty a sum not exceeding $5,810,000 for Finance Communications Services Manitoba for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.4, resolved that there be granted to Her Majesty a sum not exceeding $2,493,000 for Finance, Treasury for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed.
order, the hour being 2:30, committee rise.
As per the sessional order, the hour being 2:30, committee rise.